Hey guys, what is up, and I welcome each and every one of you to a new League of Legends video. So we're almost at the end of patch 6.17 and patch 6.18 is right around the corner, and there are going to be quite a few changes coming here that I feel like you guys need to know about. So this video will be the same as all the other patch overview videos that we have done in the past, except for this one it seems like the majority of changes are simply nerfs. So in other words, this patch definitely seems to be the patch of nerfs because this is also the patch that Worlds will be played on. So I guess it kind of makes sense for Riot to be very cautious to try and not make a single champion seem too overpowered. Now right before we jump into what's coming in this patch, I want to quickly mention that I am going to be doing a big giveaway with a bunch of other YouTubers and friends where we will be giving away gaming chairs, SteelSeries headsets, and even a $5,000 Alienware computer. I'll have a link to it down below if you want to enter. Good luck to everyone. Alright guys, so let's jump into the first nerf happening this patch of many, and this one will be towards Ashe. Now Ashe is still considered to be a pretty damn good ADC. I mean, she's not necessarily top tier like Jhin is, but she's not far from it. But when it comes to competitive play, Ashe is extremely strong of a pick because you can peel the ADC much easier with communication and coordination, but mainly her ultimate can set up so many catches that your team can easily follow up with that. She's a very highly contested pick. So her W cooldown has been increased at the lower ranks and only just a measly 1 extra second at rank 5. Now this is obviously mainly towards her laning phase because her W harass in the laning phase or just simply using her W to even CS in a poor matchup is a little bit too strong, so dumbing that down a little bit and making it slightly more difficult for her to get past the laning phase, which she shouldn't be all that strong in because she does scale late game, should be somewhat more problematic. Not the biggest nerf in the world, but still a nerf nonetheless. Next up, there's a small nerf happening to Echo, but the only reason I want to bring it up is because I do believe top lane Echo right now with Triforce and tank items or even something like Titanic Hydra is very strong, and chances are we are going to be still seeing him quite frequently being picked as a successful top laner consistently at Worlds. Again, not the biggest nerf in the world, only losing 4 base damage, but nonetheless a very good champion, one that is problematic at the moment, and I really don't feel like this is going to really break him completely. Next up, we have one of the few buffs that we will be talking about in this patch, and this is going to be towards Misfortune. Now at first glance, it doesn't seem like the biggest thing in the entire world. I mean, her passive no longer does half damage to turrets and now does full damage, but when you take into consideration how the first blood tower now exists and the bot lane tower is the only one without the fortification, aka usually it'll be the first tower going down, this can actually be quite big for Misfortune because she will be able to do that much more damage to the towers now whenever proccing her passive on it, which if you do it correctly shouldn't be all that difficult to consistently reproc it. Now the question is, will this suddenly make Misfortune one of the best ADCs to pick at Worlds or even in the next patch? Honestly, at the end of the day, probably not, but I definitely feel like this is going to be a decent buff to her. People are going to start picking her up again because you can now kill that tower that much faster and quicker, and her laning phase is still actually quite dominant, so this could definitely slowly be the return of Misfortune. Next up, we have a champion that I feel like is extremely annoying in the top lane simply because of what the first item he rushes is. And that champion is without question Gnar. Now Gnar will be receiving some nerfs, somewhat surprisingly, since at the very moment he isn't necessarily overpowered, his win rate isn't all that high, but there's also something else in addition to Gnar's nerf that is going to hit him quite hard. So first off, talking about Gnar himself, the cooldown on his E ability has been increased, especially at the lower ranks, but going back to normal at rank 5. And on top of this, in Mini Gnar, his W passive has been lowered in damage by 5 at every single rank. Now 5 damage obviously isn't do or die, but 4-second nerf on his E ability in terms of its cooldown is actually quite decent. Now Gnar has been quite successful when it comes to competitive play, so I'm almost positive this nerf is directly towards that. But there's still one more thing I want to talk about that is somewhat indirect of a nerf to Gnar, so let's talk about that next. Frozen Mallet. Oh man, this item has made a lot of issues come up very recently. It just offers way too many beneficial stats in such a very good way. One of the biggest things I hate about League of Legends is champions that can be essentially rewarded for building tankiness. But what if you have an item like Frozen Mallet that gives you best of both worlds? I mean, you have tankiness, you have utility with your slow, and you also have some decent AD. This is the item that's behind Yasuo's success and especially Gnar's success. I mean, almost every single Gnar I see rushes Frozen Mallet first. The damage spike that they get from this is very high, they're very hard to kill, and it's almost impossible to run away from Gnar, especially with the W procs. So on top of the actual nerfs happening to Gnar and also the changes happening to Frozen Mallet, where now it gives you 50 more HP but gives you 10 less AD, it should hit him quite decently. But talking a bit more specifically about Frozen Mallet itself and the nerf, At the end of the day, I don't feel like it's the biggest nerf in the entire world because you're just going to be rewarded with more tankiness while still getting 30 AD. I still don't think that's going to break this item completely. I still think it's quite fantastic of a buy, and maybe increasing the cost would have been a better option. I would even argue that in certain aspects, the new Frozen Mallet and what it offers might even be better. But speaking of changes happening specifically directed towards Worlds, the next nerf is also as such, Rek'Sai, getting the base armor reduced and the armor growth reduced as well. Now I have to say Rek'Sai even in solo queue is still considered to be probably top 5 junglers because she is really strong, she has fantastic gank potential, great initiation, and just overall fantastic map presence. And late game when you have a pretty much full tank Rek'Sai coming at you trying to knock you up to start initiating something for the team, it's very hard to stop her. And even though I don't feel like she is the best jungler at the very moment, when it comes to competitive play, she's definitely up there because in my opinion, Graves is probably the strongest jungler at the very moment, but you don't really see him in competitive play because he's just simply not as reliable. So this should overall affect Rek'Sai's jungle clear since now she has lower armor and also gets less armor per level. But I'm curious to see how hard this will affect Rek'Sai when it comes to the actual live servers and non-competitive play, the casual play. Because right now she is sitting at around a 48% win rate in solo queue, which really isn't all that high, and with these nerfs coming in next patch as well, that could definitely drop down to 47%. The next champion in line to receive some more nerfs, again this is the patch of nerfs for Worlds, is going to be top lane Shen. Shen has been underrated as hell. I mean, he is actually very strong at the moment. I'm surprised I'm not seeing him much more frequently. Not only does he have a pretty good laning phase, he has a lot of damage scaling in as well with his Q ability, but his ultimate is still his ultimate. It still offers insane amount of global pressure. It's really hard to play around against if you're on the enemy team, and it's just very annoying. On top of this, his W that essentially makes any auto attacks just not work inside the circle. It's very hard to play around that, and Shen just simply offers a lot to his team. But Riot is clearly aware of this, and Shen, being strong in a competitive environment and can offer so much to the team in that kind of sense, he will be receiving some nerfs. For instance, his passive shield strength has been lowered, and also the damage on his Q for the next 3 auto attacks and if the Spirit Blade hits a target have both been lowered. Now the damage on his Q is all percentage damage, so in the laning phase it probably wouldn't really affect him all that much, but late game when he's pretty much full tank and being a very tanky champion and initiator for his team, his damage output just won't be as high and crazy as it currently is, even though it will still be something very respectable. But moving along the nerf train, we have Taliyah, another champion that is very highly contested among higher elo players and especially in competitive play because just like every other champion so far, she simply offers a lot. Right now her roam potential and her out pushing potential is almost unmatched. I mean, her QEW will pretty much destroy any single wave, her Q ability will in itself already destroy a wave, and her roaming potential with her ultimate and her passive is very hard to match. So what's happening to her? Well, her Q no longer deals 50% extra damage to minions, so obviously clearing the waves will be that much more difficult and she'll have to use more of her abilities to get the same result. Or just simply have more damage or be more fed. But following this, the trap damage on her E ability has been lowered by 10 at rank 1 and all the way up to 30 at rank 5. Almost every single Taliyah player will max their E ability second just because of how much damage it can really offer, so this being nerfed down to 30 damage at rank 5 should overall make her mid-game power very slightly weaker so that she won't just instantly burst any one single target that gets caught out accidentally. All in all, this is without question directed towards more competitive side and even the higher elo side where she is extremely dominant, and Riot has stated that they do not want Taliyah to be the center of attention in Worlds and pretty much have every single pick revolve around her, because at the very moment she is very similar to Azir, where prior to, Azir used to be picked and banned in the mid lane almost every single game, and the mid lane picks would always revolve around Azir. They don't want that happening with Taliyah, so here are the nerfs. Now there's still 2 more things to talk about, the first of which being Vladimir, a champion I'm sure all of you are sick and tired of seeing in the LCS and competitive play. So the nerfs to him are as follows. His base health has been reduced by 25 and the cooldown on his E ability has been increased by 4 seconds at rank 1, dropping down to the same at rank 5 being 5 seconds. But on top of this, the health cost has been changed to cost 8% at all ranks rather than 10%, which is definitely better for the late game, not necessarily that much of a difference for the early game in the laning phase. So what does this mean? Well, his laning phase is just simply weaker. He's not as strong, he will have slightly more of a difficult time to sustain through it and actually deal more damage, but if he gets past it successfully and he gets way over into the late game, he might even be stronger. All in all, not too bad of a nerf. I mean, having Vladimir also have a pretty decent laning phase was quite problematic. I mean, he is a late game champion. There's no reason for him to also have a decent laning phase. So in competitive play, whenever you see Vladimir, it should be overall just easier to counterpick him and shut him down. That's the intention here, I believe. This should definitely affect his solo queue win rate as well, maybe bringing it down by 1 or 2%, but for the most part, Vladimir is still Vladimir, just not as strong. And the final nerf we're talking about in this patch is going to be Yasuo. Yasuo has been very infamous as of the past couple of weeks. His win rate has absolutely skyrocketed. Tank Yasuo top lane with PD, Triforce, Frozen Mallet, Infinity Edge, all that stuff put together, and also the bug that exists where he gets a free auto attack. It's been a shitstorm. So Yasuo's nerfs are as follows. His attack speed per level has been lowered by quite a decent amount, but his base attack speed has been increased to 0.67 from 0.658. But it does not stop there, because his R ability has also been nerfed to a pretty decent spot. Because now whenever Yasuo uses his ultimate, the 50% bonus armor penetration that he gets will only be affected towards his critical strikes. Now, I have to say this is a pretty good nerf, but for the most part I've started to see Yasuo's go items such as Phantom Dancer into Frozen Mallet into Infinity Edge. What does that give you? 100% crit. So up until that point, yeah, it's gonna kind of suck with his ultimate, it's not gonna be as effective, but eventually once you get those 3 items, it's pretty much no change whatsoever. But this will make it slightly more awkward to get Frozen Mallet as a second item to delay the 100% crit and overall delay the damage spike on your ultimate. So overall, it's a pretty decent nerf to Yasuo and the shitstorm that he's caused over the past couple of weeks or the past patch, so very curious to see how this one is going to play out. But either way guys, I mean, that is about it for this patch, and this is the Worlds patch again. Like I said, a lot of nerfs happening, which is why there's just so many things to talk about. But either way, I hope you guys did enjoy this video and found it useful, ready to go into the next patch, patch 6.18, not really being too surprised by anything that you see. If you did enjoy this video and want me to continue doing this every single 2 weeks per patch coming out, let me know by hitting that like button, subscribe if you haven't, check out my other videos as well. But I truly thank each and every one of you for watching. Hope to see you for the next one.